Can you hear me okay without the microphone? Yeah, it's probably easier without it. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for inviting me along tonight, and thanks for the for coming along. I nearly didn't make it because my sat-nav tried to direct me through the river over there. So thankfully I'm here. Okay, so I'm going to talk briefly through some aspects of the economic arguments. It's not time to go through everything tonight, obviously. We want to go into the Q&A as quick as possible, but obviously during the Q&A there'll be plenty of time if you want to go into any other aspects on the economic side of it or any more detail on anything I've got here. So to start off, I'm going to just cover a wee bit about my journey to Yes, why I'm here. Now, as Callum said, my background is in manufacturing. I've been in manufacturing for about 30 years. For the last 10 years I've been running my own businesses. I've now got manufacturing businesses in Scotland, England and Eastern Europe. When the referendum came along as a live issue a couple of years ago, I thought it would make sense to have a look at the data to try and understand what I should be considering in terms of the effect it would have on business, etc. As I say, doing business north and south of the border. So what I did was I went and dug up the numbers and looked at it as if it was a business deal. If Scotland PLC was a business, is it something you'd want to invest in or something you wouldn't want to touch with a barge pole? Because that's what I've been used to doing, investing in businesses, buying and selling businesses, and looking at the numbers. Ignored all the political spin, went and dug all the data up, did the spreadsheets and the number crunching, and what I found surprised me, because probably like you, over the years I've been led to believe that Scotland was subsidised, we couldn't afford anything, we couldn't stand on our own 2 feet, etc, etc. And the numbers will go through tell quite the opposite story, in fact. So then I got involved in Business for Scotland about a year and a half ago, went to a meeting, volunteered for something, put my toe in the water, and before long I was in swimming with the sharks, and it's been entertaining. So without further ado, let's go on to the numbers. This is a rich country, and don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Scots generate more tax per person than the UK average. And here's some data from the last 5 years. So this is Scotland's average tax take per person, the UK average, and the difference going back just over the last 5 years. And over that 5-year period, Scotland's generated £10,000 per person in tax, the UK average £8,800. Now we're talking about tax here, we're talking about everything. It's income tax, national insurance, VAT, corporation tax, road tax, whatever, all added together divided by the population. Those are the numbers. You can go dig this stuff down yourself, it's all readily available on government websites. Last year wasn't a one-off, the last 5 years wasn't a one-off. If you go back to when the data first started getting collected back in 1980, that's the data set. Now if you can see that at the back, there's 2 lines for each year there. The dark line, the higher line, is Scotland's tax take per person. The shorter line, the lighter line, is the UK average. Same story going right back to 1980. Some years, a bit more. Other years, like the mid-1980s and latterly in the 2000s, it's been an embarrassing amount more. So we do generate more revenue. Another way to look at the wealth of a nation is what they call GDP. This is how they measure relative wealth of countries globally. It's the number that the economists and the Chancellor looks at when they're figuring out how fast the economy is growing. We talk about growth rates, they're talking about GDP. Gross domestic product growth rates. If you look at that, Scotland's GDP per person last year, 11% more than the UK average, the year before 18% higher. Same story, going back in time, through the last 3 decades, it's been Scotland's been generating more GDP and more national income than the UK average. The interesting point about this is when you exclude oil, take oil completely out of the picture, and just look at the economies with onshore activity. Scotland's economy, GDP per head, is the same as the UK average. Oil is very much the bonus on top of that. When you look at that in terms of what it means, on last year's data, Scotland, 14th richest country in the industrialised world, the UK at number 18. We kind of jump about in and out of the top 10 year on year, depending on how we're doing and everyone else is doing. The UK is always several places below Scotland. That's the league table from last year. The top 12 countries in the world in terms of national wealth per person. Interesting point about that is when you look at some of those countries, who are they? Luxembourg, Norway, Switzerland, Denmark, Sweden, Austria, Netherlands, Finland. The table's jam-packed full of small, independent, North and West European countries, not dissimilar in size to Scotland, most of whom, it has to be said, most of whom have a lot less natural resources than us. So if they can do that, what's stopping us? There's a reason that small countries do better in general, and it's because they're able to react quicker to opportunities, they're able to deal with threats and problems faster, and manage their way out of problems that they do encounter. Same as big companies, small companies tend to react a lot quicker than big corporations. That tends to be the way it works. And the same with countries. So over the years, over the decades, those countries have tended to drift to the top of the world league tables. There's 3 countries in there that aren't in that category: US, Canada, Australia. Of course, all used to be ruled by, and Singapore's in there as well. All, of course, used to be ruled by London. None of them queuing up to come back under Westminster control anytime soon. If you look at the tax take in relation to spend as well, and you just look back over the last 5 years, if Scotland got back the same percentage of spend from Westminster that we give them in terms of the percentage of UK tax take, we would have been £8.5 billion better off over that 5-year period, £1,600 per person. We do spend more, but the tax we generate more than covers for them. And don't take my word for it, Standard & Poor's report from February this year, talking about the richness, relative diversified state of the Scottish economy. If Scotland was an independent country, Standard & Poor's would give them their highest economic assessment. Standard & Poor's, of course, being the ratings agency that determines how the money markets treat an independent country. And that's them just looking at onshore income. They've excluded oil and gas, so just looking at onshore activity. Scotland would qualify for their highest economic assessment. So, I'm going to show you a couple of charts now, move away from the numbers very quickly. And this is round about where does the UK's wealth come from and where does it end up. First chart is a chart from Eurostat data, looking at different parts of the UK. It's GDP per part of the UK, and the darker the colour, the higher the GDP, the more wealth is generated in that part of the UK. Now, as you'd expect, City of London generates a lot of wealth, along the M4 corridor down to the south coast, a bit around the Manchester area, and in the north east of Scotland, and to some extent across the central belt. That's where the wealth is generated when you break it down into parts of the UK. Second chart is UK Office of National Statistics. This is where the wealthiest households in the UK are. The darker the colour, the higher the percentage of what they call wealthy households. Wealthy household being a household with total assets just under £1 million, which is your house, your stocks and shares, your car, your yacht, whatever, all added up. If it's just under £1 million, they count as wealthy. 13% of households in the south of England are classified as wealthy. The further north you go, it's a very dark colour. The further north you go, the less and less it is. In Scotland, it's less than 7%. So that kind of answers the paradox, because people say to me, why is it that Scotland doesn't look like a rich country? That kind of answers the paradox. That's where the money is generated, and that's where it ends up, which is the answer to the paradox of why on paper Scotland looks rich, but when you drive around large parts of it, it sure don't look rich. So in answer to the question you get, too poor, don't let them tell you, too poor, high right, absolutely not the case. Scotland's well capable of surviving and thriving on its own 2 feet economically. Why the naysayers? Why do you get people coming on television night after night telling you that we can't afford it, it's going to be a disaster, we'll be poor as church mice, we shouldn't even think about it? The sad reality is a lot of it comes down to self-interest. If you've worked your way up the political greasy pole and you get to your mid-career and you found yourself a safe seat somewhere, you've got a job for life, if you play your cards right, you end up in the House of Lords, and you get £200 a day for turning up. And then this independence malarkey comes along and all of a sudden you're looking at being out of a job in a year's time. It focuses the mind. As I say, the sad reality is a lot of these folks are very much focused on what it's going to do to their careers personally. And there's a nice wee quote that summarises that up very succinctly. It's hard to get someone to understand something when their salary depends on them not understanding it. And Alistair Darling in particular, who is that far away from a seat in the House of Lords, if we can get this no vote over the line. I'm going to touch very, very briefly on scare stories, because I know that we've obviously got to broaden out the discussion. This would be funny if it wasn't sad. It's the most ironic thing you've read in your life. This is from the 1979 referendum editorial in the Daily Express, warning about all the horrible bad things that would happen to Scotland's economy if we had the audacity to vote for the Scottish Assembly in 1979. Of course, there was a yes vote, but the Scottish Assembly didn't in fact come to pass at that stage. And what they're talking about here, the coal mines, Ravenscraig, Linwood, Bathgate and Dounreay, of course, ceased to exist in the 80s. So scare stories have a long pedigree. Both Standard Life and Scottish Widows came out in the 1980s before the devolution referendum and talked about, made the statement publicly they would both leave Scotland if we voted yes for a Scottish Parliament in the 1990s. Of course, they're still here, so you need to take a lot of this stuff with more than a pinch of salt. Learn from history. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Let's not get fooled at the third time of asking. And I'm going to touch on one more scare story very quickly. I thought I could talk about scare stories and debunking them all night. This is a headline from the Daily Telegraph, November of last year. Only Mexicans have a worse state pension than the British. 40 industrialised countries in the world looked at the state pension compared to the cost of living in those countries. Mexico's number 40, the UK number 39. It's relevant in most European countries, all European countries, pretty much anyone that knows anyone that's getting a state pension from another European country will know they're better than what you get in the UK. So the whole point is that the No campaign talks about, threatens us with the fact that if we were independent we couldn't afford the wonderful British state pension. So 2 points, of course. It's they've got cheap to talk about that when the British state pension is such a disgrace. But secondly, when you go look at the numbers and you look at social protection, which is welfare cost plus pensions, crunch the numbers the last 5 years, Scotland's much better to afford the pension. Our spend on pensions and welfare is a lower percentage of our national income in terms of our GDP, and a lower percentage of our tax take than it is for the UK as a whole. So if we can't afford pensions, the UK absolutely can't afford them. And I'm going to finish up with something that maybe kind of highlights a wee bit about the opportunities that we've got as an independent Scotland, which is a very important part of the mix as well. And it's by way of a short story about our near neighbour Norway. We've done all right. And it's a wee story about the Prime Minister of Norway goes for a short walk along the fjord one day, and he comes across the magic lamp, and he picks the magic lamp up and gives it a rub, and the genie pops out. And the genie says to the Prime Minister of Norway, "I'll give you some wishes to make Norway a better place." And the Prime Minister says, "Well, that's a difficult one. We're just about the richest country in the world. They measure these things and tell us we're the happiest country in the world. We've got very little poverty to speak of. People have got decent jobs, they've got leisure time, and they've got money to enjoy it. It's hard to think of something that would make us a better place." And the genie says, "Well, you need to think of something." So the Prime Minister thinks for a minute and says, "Well, I can think of a few things." He says, "Okay, on you go." So we've got a strong economy, but it's quite a narrow base. We've got oil, we've got fisheries, we've not got much else. It would be nice to have some other sectors we could rely on into the future. For example, I'll think of one. We've got a national drink called Aquavit that we love, but nobody else has ever heard of it. Wouldn't it be wonderful if that was a global brand and people from Singapore to Chicago would pay stupid money to take this drink off our hands, and we were the only people that were allowed to make it, and we couldn't make enough of this stuff? That'd be a nice wee industry to have that we could rely on. He says, "Yeah, we can do that for you." We've got a problem with our language. We speak Norwegian. Nobody else in the world speaks Norwegian. We've got to go on holiday or do business. We've got to learn another language. It's hard work. Wouldn't it be great if Norwegian was the world business language, and we went to Japan or Brazil or anywhere, got off the plane, just speak to people in Norwegian, and they all understood what we were saying? That would make life a wee bit easier. He says, "Yeah, we can do that for you." He said, "We've got a beautiful country here in Norway, but it's really big, and the weather's horrible. If you want to build infrastructure, it costs a fortune, takes forever. And the weather, in the winter, the snow's up to here, and it's -35 for 3 months of the year. We've got snowplows out, getting things done is difficult." It'd be great with the same natural resources and the same population in a country, a quarter the size, and nice mild winters, so we don't have to worry about getting the snowplows out too often. So we can do that for you. He said, we've got a problem getting to our global markets. We've got to go through 2 other countries if we want to export anything. It'd be great with a land mass of 60 million people just bolted onto a southern border there, and they all spoke their region, of course, and they all wanted to buy our drink and our oil and our fisheries and everything else and our energy. We wouldn't want to be ruled by them, you understand. We just want to have those neighbours we could trade with, and that'd be nice. It'd be great if we had 4 of the top 100 universities of the world were in Norway. It'd be great for the diaspora, tens of millions of people around the world that wanted us to succeed and would support us in doing things. And it'd be great for that, and industrial heritage going back 200 years, and people were happy to do business with us from a technology point of view because they respected what our engineers and our scientists had invented over the decades. And it'd be great with a stronger national brand. It would help our business, help our tourism. For example, if our national poet was celebrated every year in Russia and America, the national press, everybody instantly recognised, that would make life a bit easier. The whole point, of course, is that the No campaign laugh at us when we talk about one day we could aspire to be as well as Norway. In 1970, Norway was poorer than Scotland. They've been dealt a couple of cards, they've played them very well. Small country, made the most of what they've got. But when you sit down on a blank piece of paper and write out what an ideal, perfect scenario for an independent country in the 21st century should be, and you look at history, language, population, natural resources, skill sets, whatever you name it, right, you come up with something that looks very, very much like Scotland. All the bits of the jigsaw there, the only bit that's missing is getting people to vote yes on 18th of September. Then the hard work begins, but with a bit of luck, given the advantages we've got, we can build something really special here. Look forward to your questions. Thanks very much.